giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles, with Dog Nation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chaffins.
Hey there, and welcome to On the Beat. Cody Chaffins and Mike Griffith with you, and we've got a lot to talk about today. Even though, Mike, it's really kind of a weird, quiet week.
Yeah, I'm going through withdrawals, man. I'm used to getting my fix and dose at Kirby Smart, and of course, last week they didn't have anything. This week they didn't have anything, and yet we got some playoff games coming up this weekend that are going to have a lot to do with what we see moving forward. Particularly the Indiana Notre Dame game on Friday night. That's interesting. Tennessee at Ohio State. The winner of that's going to get the Ducks. You got Penn State hosting SMU, not really sure what to expect in that shootout. And then Clemson takes their act to Texas, and can they play with the Longhorns? I mean, that's a curious game to me when you think back to how effective Clemson was in the first half against Georgia. Or do you get the second half Clemson? So a lot out there. Awards starting to kind of filter out now. We got to see Travis Hunter win the Heisman Trophy. Plenty of stuff still going on, but as far as meat on the bone right here in Athens, feels a little slim. Yeah,
other than a few transfer portal things, which nothing's really, at least to this point, as we record on Monday afternoon, nothing's really piqued my interest that way as well. But we did have one thing, like you mentioned, that was going on this past weekend. It was the Heisman Trophy ceremony. And as I was sitting back and watching Travis Hunter, and excited for him. Honestly, one of those guys I covering high school football, did everything at Collins Hill, brought that school a state championship. But I started thinking, you go back to his signing day, and it was one of those, nobody really expected anything. He was an FSU guy. We thought if he flips, maybe he could flip to Georgia. Like, there was still a possibility there. Ends up kind of surprising everybody going the Jackson State route. But it got you thinking, what if he was a dog? How close was Georgia to getting Travis Hunter? And what if he would have come to Athens? Would he have ended up on that Heisman stage in New York? It's something interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think that, people can come to Georgia and achieve anything. But, the level of competition here is such. Kirby's not in a position to be able to promise kids things, and being a two-way player, I mean, number one, you got to learn the defense at Georgia. Number two, Kirby likes to use a lot of his best players on special teams. So now if you had a talent like Travis Hunter, talking with Fran Brown a little bit earlier today, I think they're going to have a two-way guy up at Syracuse next year. They're signing. So this could be the start of something. You might see a little bit of this, but it takes a really special guy. And then it takes a coach that's willing to make that commitment to that individual. At Georgia, there's so much talent everywhere. There's no doubt, Travis Hunter would have competed immediately for playing time, but would he have won a corner job as a freshman at Georgia? I'm not sure. Or as a safety, I'm sure he would have played a lot. I mean, we've seen what KJ Bolden could do this year, but KJ also plays on some special teams unit, and as talented as he is, it seems like it would have been a big ask to ask KJ Bolden to go both ways. I'm not sure what sort of discussions they had as far as coming out of high school. I know talking to Fran, Georgia was recruiting him coming out of Jackson State, but I think, Travis knew all along that he was going to stay with Deion Sanders. And because of how unique he is, Cody, that was the right coach for him. It was the right move for him. You saw it pay off. I've talked to a lot of people in Gwinnett County as well as Collins Hill about Travis Hunter. And, the guy's legit. He's a hardworking guy. He's a good guy. He was very focused. He did, he explained why he didn't party, why he didn't do all those things. This kid had a vision early on, and he had a very unique business savvy as well. And he was playing for a coach, that was able to really give him that sort of individual attention to achieve those sort of things that he wanted to achieve.
Yeah, you've got to give him the credit, because to me, my reaction was, that was it was a huge gamble going to Jackson State. You got a guy who, a D1A prospect is saying, now I'm going to go to Jackson State and I'm going to go with this coach, Deion Sanders, who at that time was unproven. We know what he's done in the NFL, but he hadn't proven himself as a coach, and he's going to make a bunch of money from Barstool, and there was all this stuff going on. And it was like, but you know what? To his credit, he did exactly what he said he was going to do, and he ends up winning the Heisman. So it's pretty impressive there.
It's interesting, Cody, now that you put it that way. It's almost as if Deion needed Travis and Travis needed Deion, right? He gambled on Deion gambled on him. There's no way, I don't think, that he could have known when he went to Jackson State that Deion would be at Colorado 1 year later in a position to give him enough of a platform to win the Heisman Trophy. I mean, you look at the Boise State running back, he was fantastic. If he does those things in the SEC, he probably wins the Heisman Trophy, right? You look at Dylan Gabriel as the quarterback at Oregon. If he does those things at Georgia for an undefeated Georgia in the SEC, he probably wins the Heisman. So a lot of things as a Heisman voter and someone that's voted on this for 20, however many years, you kind of, it's not something you put in a box of what a Heisman, I guess I'm like the college football playoff committee here, right? It changes from year to year as far as what I'm looking for. It's just kind of like, you know it when you see it. Yep, that's it. That's the guy. I mean, look at Stetson Bennett. You know, Stetson wasn't even a first-team All-SEC guy, and yet he was a Heisman finalist because he was the quarterback for an undefeated team that was in the midst of a dynasty. Reflecting back, I think we would all say, well, yeah, Brock Bowers was the best player on the team. Well, why wasn't he up there? Well, because he's not a quarterback, right? So there's a lot more to the Heisman Trophy than just being the best player in the nation. Now, it just so happens that Travis Hunter, you know, I think he is the best player in the nation, and he doesn't play quarterback. But because of that unique two-way snap count, I think he averaged 120 snaps a game. And because of Deion Sanders, right? If Travis Hunter does that at another program, does he get the same amount of attention? The media is there because Deion's there. It's an FBS conference. Shedeur Sanders is there, a top quarterback. So a lot of things had to come together for this to work for Travis Hunter, even though he was the best player in the nation. Could it work for Brock Bowers? I mean, you know, maybe Kirby should have turned him loose at defensive end on third downs or something. And I bet you Brock Bowers could have sacked a quarterback or two. Don't be surprised if you don't see that someday. I remember Jason Witten was a guy that the folks at Tennessee thought could have played defensive end, but very difficult to pull off. Because you don't really know what the circumstances will be, what the team record will be, if there'll be another candidate at an undefeated, you know, school. But again, you look at the Boise State running back, and if he does that on an undefeated Georgia, he's the Heisman Trophy winner, in my opinion, right? Because I think the team's platform and result has a lot to do with the award. Hunter was able to overcome that, even though the Buffaloes didn't make the playoff, because he's a phenom and because he's a human highlight reel and because he plays for Deion Sanders. So pretty fascinating stuff there. I was happy for him. He seems, all reports, good kid. Tough that he got away from Georgia. And for a lot of us, you know, when he checked out and went outside the SEC, I mean, you know, the SEC commands so much attention in college football. He did it in spite of not playing in the SEC.
All right, so I was thinking, you know, first it got me thinking, what if Travis Hunter was a dog? We kind of talked about that. My other question is, when's it going to be our turn again? You're sitting in Indianapolis, you know, and it had been 40 years since Georgia had won a national title. It's been over 40 years now since Georgia has had a Heisman winner. You got to go back to 1982 with Herschel Walker. Yes, they did get a finalist with Stetson Bennett, but really, he finished fourth that year. It wasn't that close. So it got me thinking all these reasons, you know, why it could be tough for Georgia to have a Heisman winner, why it could be helpful to be at Georgia to have a Heisman winner. So I'll start with this. You talked about playing both ways. A guy like Malachi Starks, he was someone I also covered in high school at Jefferson High School. He was just as prolific on the offensive side of the football as he was on the defense. I remember at his signing day commitment, I said to him, hey, you have conversations about maybe doing, you know, playing both ways, contributing on both sides of the ball? He said, yeah, you know, we did talk about that. You know, of course, he has not played anything on offense, has had a couple punt returns, maybe on special teams, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be in the formula. You're not going to get this flashy person like a Travis Hunter because that just doesn't seem to be Georgia's formula.
Well, yeah, I'll say never, but to your point, I think a Heisman winner from Georgia, I think it'd be a lot easier to do it as a quarterback. I mean, again, if Stetson was first team, if Stetson had put up prolific passing numbers, he could have won the Heisman Trophy. I mean, there's a reason why Georgia went after Caleb Williams after the 2021 national title, right? So I do think it's possible for a quarterback. And the reason I say that is because at Georgia, when you look at the substitution patterns, you know, you've got a lot of running backs. And the running backs like that, by the way. They don't want to go there and carry the ball, you know, 30 touches a game for 3 years. That's a lot of mileage on a guy. They want to get prepared for the NFL primarily. It's not going to be like Herschel Walker when the whole offense is built around one guy and a guy like Herschel could carry the Dogs to the national championship as he did as a freshman with an injured shoulder nonetheless in the Sugar Bowl, which is still a fascinating story to me. And hopefully we'll have a chance to retell that with the Dogs playing in the Sugar Bowl on January 1st. But it's a different game now. You don't see as many running backs, right? Derrick Henry did it, you know, but he was a bit of a phenom at Alabama. You know, he had the right platform. I think a Georgia quarterback can absolutely win the Heisman Trophy. Not sure about a running back or a receiver because of the way Kirby likes to use these guys on special teams. And again, that's not a punishment. That's building value into the player for the NFL. And that's what Kirby does in development is he gets these guys ready for the NFL. They come to him, they want to play in the league, right? They want to play in the NFL. They want to be high draft picks. The Heisman can come along the way if you have that outstanding season or if you do those special things. Again, I just refer back to the Stetson Bennett Brock Bowers comparison. Stetson was the quarterback. He was high profile when the highlights played. Stetson had a phenomenal game against LSU the final weekend before the Heisman voting. I think that vaulted him to the forefront in a lot of people's minds. They got to see that performance when the Dogs scored over 50 points in the SEC championship game in 2022. But it took that. What if Georgia won that game 17-14? Stetson Bennett's probably not in New York City. So there's a little bit of the prisoner of the moment and the recency bias. What have you done lately? What has your team done? These are all winning teams. I think there's only been one man that's won the Heisman Trophy on a losing team back at Notre Dame a long time ago. So it takes a lot of circumstances. It takes some promotion. Talking with Jim Donnan recently, he said, the one mistake we made with Champ Bailey at Georgia, he said we didn't promote him. We should have promoted him. Champ Bailey had better numbers than Charles Woodson, who won the Heisman in '97, but Georgia didn't promote him for the Heisman Trophy. So a lot of things have to come together. A lot of the marketing, the deal on the front end, like Fran Braun telling me, you got to know going in that the guy's special enough and has the conditioning to play 120 snaps. And it's not high school anymore. It's FBS, and guys are bigger, faster, stronger, and you're managing, bumps and bruises every single week, and you still have to do what's best for the team to win games. It's not all about individuals, certainly not at Georgia. So, to me, it's impressive when you see a guy like Jalen Walker win the Butkus Award, saw Jordan Davis win the Outland Trophy. We've seen Malachi as a finalist for a lot of these awards, All-American every year. See Brock Bowers, he won the tight end trophy. I'm trying to think of what that tight end trophy
Mackey
is.
Award, right?
The Mackey, yeah, the Mackey. I keep thinking, I can't remember the school. They had a guy named Brian Natkin, and as a promotional deal, they sent out a napkin with the guy's character, and they called it the Natkin Napkin. So I can remember that guy better than the award. It must be a pretty effective marketing campaign, but it all goes together. And all these guys have an argument. If you looked at the finalists, they all had an argument to win the Heisman Trophy. But what Travis Hunter did was just so phenomenal, and I'm excited for him and the people at Collins Hill High School and everybody that was involved, even at Georgia Sports Performance. The training that he did there, the coaches that, Social Circle head coach Rob Patton gave him a ride to school. Everybody contributed to something like that. And then where my mind goes with it, Cody, is all the high school players that play the game. They're not guaranteed scholarships. They're certainly not guaranteed a Heisman Trophy. But all these coaches and people in the community that support the kids that are going for these sorts of awards, playing football, what does this do for these kids as individuals as they become leaders in the community, fathers, husbands, down the line? And that's the value that Kirby always talks about. And in doing that story on Travis Hunter and hearing how many people were involved in his growth and development in Gwinnett County and in Collins Hill, it's kind of magical. He's somebody that everybody in that whole community can be proud of.
All right, so we talked about, Georgia. You said it's probably going to be a quarterback if Georgia's going to get a Heisman winner. I tend to agree with you because we hear Kirby Smart over and over say, the defense dictates who gets the ball. We don't have a game plan that says we're going to throw it to Brock Bowers today, and that's one of those things that even when Brock Bowers was there, it wasn't just Brock Bowers plays, although sometimes it did seem like that at points. And so if it's going to be a quarterback, then the question is, you look at the quarterbacks who won recently from the SEC. You got Jaden Daniels, who's kind of a runner, right? So he's kind of doing things that Georgia doesn't do a ton. They could here in the bowl game with Gunnar Stockton, but they don't do a ton of running quarterbacks. So you're not going to get those kind of prolific numbers that you see a lot there. Then you got guys like Bryce Young, Joe Burrow, who are not necessarily runners, but you look at the guys that they were throwing to those years. You got John Mechie and Jamison Williams for Bryce Young, of course, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson for Joe Burrow. So my question is, in this NIL age where Georgia doesn't seem to be wanting to be out there on the forefront paying the wide receiver the most, the NFL guy, are they surrounding a quarterback with enough? Carson Beck, we thought would be a Heisman contender this year. His wide receivers let him down. Let's be frank about it this year. Is Georgia surrounding a quarterback enough to win a Heisman?
Well, of late this year, no. But also remember their top two receivers had the off-field issues that took them out of the lineup. I mean, who knows what happens if Colby Young and Ra Thomas are out there all year, or if Ladd McConkey decides to come back for another year. If Georgia would have paid Ladd to come back for another year, I know he was open to that. Easy to say now, hindsight's 2020. I'm like you though, even though things are very quiet on the surface with Georgia, you and I both know Kirby's meeting with players. Everybody's a free agent at the end of every year. Everybody on his team that are coming back have an idea what they're going to get. Certain guys are getting calls from other schools, probably going into Kirby saying, "Hey, Team A and Team B are offering this. What's it look like at Georgia?" Kirby's got his structure. Georgia has their way. Kirby, I think, is ahead in the game in roster management. I don't know how you could say otherwise when you look at this season and you look at the number of injuries and the attrition that Georgia had, and yet here they are. Right now, to me, I don't know how they're not the betting favorite to win the national championship just because of the bracket they're in. And I know a lot of these, the quarterback situation. Well, whoever's saying that doesn't know Georgia very well, because Gunnar Stockton is primed and ready for this opportunity. And in a lot of ways, this is going to make Georgia even more dangerous, because now you add the threat of a running quarterback. It's like that 12th guy, and Gunnar has shown you that he can handle the big stage. Now, there was a couple moments. There was a fumble and an interception, but Georgia overcame it against a quality competitor in Texas, the number 2 team in the country. I dare say they won't face a team that good again until the national championship game in Atlanta. So the people that are betting against Georgia, I don't think have done their homework. I think if you look at the way the defense has gotten healthier, and if you look at what Gunner's, who he is and what he's all about, and how he's ready for the big stage, and how now Mike Bobo can prepare an entire game plan around him. And it's almost like you're playing more to your strengths, because your tight ends and your offensive line, and certainly don't underestimate ETN. ETN is a huge factor in this. It just happens to coincide with Gunnar taking over.
Yeah, you talk about Georgia, and it's big team, little me, right? It used to be on all the T-shirts around there. It's a saying that Kirby kind of thinks of, and even just kind of news coming out today, the AP All-American team. Georgia didn't have anybody on the first team, yet you say they're a favorite to win the national championship. That speaks to the big team and the little me. There's not a lot of local superstars or just personal, superstars out there, which kind of does speak to how tough it is for a Georgia player to win a Heisman. One of the other things I think about is Kirby Smart talks about the SEC and the parity. Nobody's going to put up Ashton Jeanty numbers at Boise State in the SEC right now. It's just so hard. And like you said, Georgia wouldn't do that anyway. But I think that's another thing to consider when you're looking at, we didn't have an SEC finalist this year. Maybe it's just a down year for superstars in the SEC. But if all these leagues are getting equal, nobody's going to put up these eye-popping stats that you're going to see other places when you got to play really tough teams week in, week out.
No doubt it's a grind, and certainly, coaches have to be smart about it. Like Kirby says, Georgia isn't practicing to win one game. They're practicing to win all of them. And so you got to be careful. So, Carson Beck has mobility, but you're not going to run Carson Beck very much the first half of the season, because you need to protect him. He needs to be there for the finish line. I think back to Kenny McIntosh in 2022, head and shoulders the best running back on the team, but you didn't see Kenny really carry the ball with any kind of volume until down the stretch in November. Protecting Kenny McIntosh, getting him to the finish line. In NASCAR, it's like, taking care of your tires, right? You got to have your tires at the end of that run, Cody. And I think that's where the roster management comes in for Georgia. Again, Kirby's here to win national championships and help these players develop into NFL prospects. And going after individual awards, while that doesn't eliminate you from the possibility, again, we see that with the defensive players. And I mentioned Jordan Davis. I mentioned Jalen Walker. I think Cedric Van Pran might have won an award for his blocking. I mean, we have seen individual win awards. Offensively, it's a little bit harder because of what you said, the pro-style game plan, taking what the defense gives you, not going at one guy all the time, not riding one guy. Because if that guy goes down, you're in trouble, right? Or if they shut that one guy down, you're in trouble. What makes Georgia so dangerous is they have so many different guys that can hurt you in so many different ways. And the guys choose Georgia knowing that. They come in knowing that they're a part of something bigger. And the trade-off is they exit having gone against some of the best players in the country. I mean, you think about this. When Gunnar Stockton went out there wasn't a wow factor for him. And why would there be? He lines up against those guys every single day in practice. He knows his speed. He knows his range, because those guys that he's practicing against are every bit as fast and big and effective. So there's a value to playing in a program like Georgia. You may say, well, you can't get a Travis Hunter. I think if it was the right guy, you could. If Travis would have chosen Georgia, I'm sure that Kirby would have found a way to facilitate some of that. And if he could do it effectively, Kirby's not going to shy away from it. But at the same time, the team does come first, and it has to happen within the team concept because it's about winning championships here.
Yeah, we did mention the AP All-American team. I will say Dylan Fairchild, Malachi Starks, Brett Thorson, all second-team AP All-American. And then Jalen Walker, a third-team All-American, which is a joke. And then Tate Ratledge on the third team as an All-American as well. So we talked about all the reasons why it would be hard for a Georgia guy. But there are reasons why a Georgia guy could win. And a couple of those reasons that I think about, like you talked about, you're surrounded by great talent, right? So you've got a great team around you, which is only going to make a player play better. And also, you can't argue, you're going to get plenty of exposure. You come to Athens, Georgia. You're going to be on that national game of the week. How many times this year? 4 or 5 times on that ABC 7:30 kick. So you're going to get the exposure. If you're the right player, there's no excuses why you couldn't from that reason.
Yeah, no doubt. You saw Georgia was the most watched team on television this year in terms of viewership when you add up all the numbers in the television audience. So there was plenty of exposure. It was thrill-a-minute season for sure. I mean, that's part of why I think we're going through withdrawals is we had so much drama with all these games and everything Georgia was going through. And it was just such a saga to watch how Kirby managed this. Really be a shame if he doesn't win a National Coach of the Year award. I personally thought this was his best year. Maybe not the most impressive team. I mean, there's not going to be 15 NFL draft picks off this team like there was in 2021. It's not an undefeated season like it was in 2022. Even last year they held that #1 ranking and had the winningest active streak in the nation up until they lost by a field goal. This year was more of a grind. And when you've got a grind like that, we talked about the receiver attrition. Remember at the beginning of the year, they were so thin on defensive linemen. That was the saga. The running backs room, you were down to a freshman and a walk-on. And then the quarterback situation in the SEC championship game. And it's almost appropriate, that the backup quarterback comes in now and he's going to be asked to win the national title. So it has been quite a saga. It's been quite a story. I know it's, some people have said that, they get a blood pressure medicine or whatever because these games are just have been so frighteningly close. But if it ends with a championship, I dare say it may be the most satisfying one yet.
That's the bigger trophy that all of these Georgia players want to hold. If we're going to wrap up this Heisman conversation, ESPN put out there Nate Frazier on a watch list for next year. Like you seem to think it's got to be a quarterback. Is there a guy on this roster right now who could win a Heisman?
Oh, wow. Maybe if ETN comes back. I don't think Nate is ready for Heisman in 2025. I think he's phenomenal. I think he's very good. But because of what I was saying about the platooning, the reason I give ETN a chance is because he's a pass catcher and he can also return. If he were to choose that path, I know if Ladd McConkey would have came back, I think he would have been a Heisman Trophy contender. Because he already had an established name and he's such an electric player. I mean, they're finding that out in the NFL right now. I mean, I know Ladd's been in my fantasy football starting lineups. How about if Brock Bowers would have came back?
Right.
Maybe a guy that doesn't really go after the money, that that wants that college experience. And from talking to his family, Georgia never really even approached him about it. So there's got to be and why would they? They knew Brock was a first round pick. They knew they had some talented guys coming up. I'm not sure what the magic number would have been. But now that college football players are being paid, it's an interesting shift in recruiting strategies. We've seen that. When I say recruiting, I don't just mean freshmen. I mean in the portal, and I mean re-recruiting your guys. I mean the idea that I pitched. What if you say to Kendall Milton, hey, listen, man, you're projected as a 4th or a 5th rounder. How about you come back to Georgia for $750,000 and we promote you for the Heisman Trophy? What if Kendall Milton was in the backfield all season this year? What would that have looked like? Could he have been a 1,000-yard rusher? Perhaps. Could he have been pitched for the Heisman? Perhaps. If Georgia goes undefeated with Kendall Milton a tailback and he goes for 1,200 yards, is he a Heisman finalist? Maybe you look to re-recruit some of those guys now. Again, Kirby's looking at it. I think this year I saw all these Georgia signees, and there's always been talent in Georgia, but now you're looking at like, hey, maybe it would be easier to retain these guys because there's a bigger value to the in-state guys because once they build their brand in-state, a lot of these NIL deals that they have in college, this can go on for a lifetime with a lot of these Georgia businesses or Southeastern region businesses. So there's a lot at play here It's all brand new. There's no guidebook for this, but you can already see how Kirby Smart has adjusted his thinking in the high school recruiting ranks. And I dare say with some of the retention that they're going to go for. And I'll go beyond that. I think, that Cal quarterback right now, that's the hot name out there, that quarterback from California. Why aren't we hearing a lot about it right now? Well, why would you? Why would you want the distraction? Why would you want Gunnar Stockton hearing about the next greatest thing that might be coming to Georgia? You wouldn't. There's no point in being loud about it. You think about, the receivers that could be out there in the portal that Georgia could be talking to right now. What's part of that package? Could Buster Faulkner be part of the package with the Georgia Tech, wide receiver? I don't know the answer to that question, but supposing and wondering, but these are things that would be happening behind the scenes, not playing out in public. When things play out in public, things get gummed up. If you don't believe me, ask Mark Stoops. We thought he was going to be the A&M coach. He gets out there, everybody freaks out. Greg Schiano at Tennessee, right? The Schiano hire. And remember how that went and how they had to reverse course and even change ADs in the process. So a lot of times you can't really put too much of that out there.
Right. So, you talk about the in-state recruiting. C.J. Wiley, one of those guys, a wide receiver out of Milton, we'll get to see in the state championships later this week. Could he be a guy that's coming up on this roster? Talon Taylor, 5-star receiver they got on this year. Would love to see that if it was going to be a wide receiver. Who knows Nate Frazier in a couple years? And then, like you said, the last 3 Heisman winners have all transferred. So an interesting thought there. Jaden Daniels, of course, a transfer. Travis Hunter, of course, a transfer. Caleb Williams started at Oklahoma. So who knows? Maybe that guy's not on the roster, but a guy who could be coming to win a Heisman at Georgia. Talked about Tennessee. We're going to hit a little bit of playoff talk coming up next. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles.
So, you going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this
You
week?
gonna play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
This week?
And welcome to the Ingles Game of the Week as the Warhorses square off against the rival.
He's going in.
He's going in. Go, baby!
Ingles, we're with you every step of the way.
All right, so much going on here on the beat around the country that we want to hit a little bit. We're going to do all that in Mike's 30,000-foot view. All right, Mike, we're going to talk a little playoffs in just a second, but I first do want to get your opinion on the NFL, maybe the greatest coach in NFL history coming to college, Bill Belichick in his 70s, taking over at North Carolina.
Go out and get a younger coach at North Carolina, right? I mean, Mac Brown was there before. Yeah, they kind of, got a youthful coach there. Yeah, I like it. I mean, well, why wouldn't we? I mean, it's if you're North Carolina, you got to do something outside the norm to break through. And is it Bill Belichick? Is it not Bill Belichick? I like the gamble, though. I mean, obviously, this is a guy that's, got a lot of validity. This is a guy that's got a lot of, credibility. This is a guy that can get you to the NFL when Bill Belichick speaks of you. Certainly, the rest of the NFL will pay close attention. He's already accustomed to dealing with players under contract and big money guys. He knows how to run a locker room. Will the kids be ready for that management style? They need to be. They're going to want to be. That's why they're going to choose Bill Belichick, because of the NFL experience. So it stands to reason that he's going to get those serious NFL-minded kids that want to be developed by a coaching legend. When he won 6 Super Bowls as a head coach, I guess 8 Super Bowl rings in all. So this is a guy with a lot of credibility and letters behind his name. I think I heard he is going to keep Freddie Kitchens on staff. Freddie is the current interim. Freddie's a guy that played quarterback at Alabama, was once a head coach in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns, and spent a lot of time next to Bruce Arians in the NFL developing quarterbacks. So I think that's kind of a hidden weapon. A lot of people aren't talking a lot about having Freddie Kitchens there, but that's another NFL figure that's been around the block. Actually, Todd Monken was Freddie's offensive coordinator with the Browns. So I think they're going to have a good staff in place. Now, what we know is that it takes time to build relationships. And, Bill's coming in and, can he put together a class for, 2026 that's going to knock everybody's socks off? I think a lot of that's going to depend on what North Carolina does next year. But we had talked about, and some people had speculated Nick Saban for this job long ago, that North Carolina had made some noise about wanting an NFL type of guy. And, while they didn't get Nick Saban, they probably got the next best thing. And Bill Belichick, and North Carolina folks would probably argue that Bill Belichick is a better hire than Nick Saban. I would argue that myself, but based on what he did in the NFL, and the immediate credibility. And is it a coincidence, Cody, that they're playing in Fenway Park up in Boston in a bowl game against Jim Mora, who, oh, by the way, was also an NFL coach once? So a lot going on there. And what is that, the Pinstripe Bowl? That's to me, one of the more interesting matchups out there.
Yeah, I would love to see Nick Saban come as his defensive coordinator. They just go all full on Cleveland Brown days with that as well. My only question is, Bill Belichick, you think about their time in New England, he was kind of famous for letting these big contract guys walk, right? Because he didn't want, some of these guys, when they were coming up for that next big contract, they just wouldn't re-sign them because they thought they could restock it. I do wonder about that, and I wonder if he has the patience to deal with a 17-year-old prima donna recruit. And has the time to go sit in their living room and do all that, because it is a totally different thing. But we'll leave that there. We'll talk a little playoffs now. You got some great games coming up this weekend. Going to be exciting. We'll start with the team you covered in your past, Tennessee, having to go up to Ohio State. Sound like a lot of Tennessee fans are grabbing up the tickets there and want to be in the horseshoe.
Trying to. I think I heard they only get like a 3,500 ticket allotment as the visitors, and half of those are used up by staff and band. So yeah, that's a pretty hot ticket on the secondary market there. And I actually like Tennessee in this game. And part of that has to do with how Ohio State wants to play football. Ohio State wants to be physical, right? And it got them beat against Michigan. I don't know that I think Ohio State play is good enough to beat Tennessee. Remember, Tennessee beat Alabama when Alabama was playing good football this year. I've got my questions about the Big Ten. I like Tennessee in the upset here because they're a blue-collar team. I think they're good at the line of scrimmage, and I think they're good enough at quarterback to beat Ohio State in the shoe and advance to play the Oregon Ducks in the Rose Bowl.
Texas and Clemson, what catches your eye in that one?
That's interesting to me. Do we get the first half Clemson or the second half Clemson? A lot of momentum for Clemson right now. I give them a chance for this upset, largely because Texas has a quarterback issue. What are they going to do at quarterback? Is Arch Manning going to get his opportunity? We know there's a lot of Texas people that are ready for Arch. But I like the Clemson momentum. I like the way Cade Klubnik's playing right now. I don't know if they have a good enough running game to achieve some balance. They are tested. They did play Georgia. I think Dabo is a really good coach, and I just don't underestimate the momentum. I like Clemson to cover in this game, but I think ultimately playing in Austin is going to be enough for the Longhorns to survive that game and advance on into the playoff.
Yeah, SMU, Penn State, one of the other ones. Before we get to the one that we'll kind of all have our eyes on, what are you thinking, SMU, Penn State, or does it make a huge difference?
Well, I think Penn State's a better team all the way around, and they're playing at home. SMU has a very exciting quarterback, but I think Penn State has more balance. And I don't think James Franklin is as bad of a coach as everybody says. I just think the good teams he's played have been really good teams. I don't think SMU is a really good team. I think this is their first time, maybe a little deer in the headlights. I mean, they came back and tied it on Clemson. Clemson had a big lead, a little bit of a prevent. I think it's going to be different in Happy Valley. I like Penn State to win that game and advance to the playoff.
All right, so then there is the game that we all kind of have our eyes on, Notre Dame and Indiana. Are there things specifically you're looking for when you watch this game?
Well, I want to finish up. Penn State would advance to play Boise State in the Fiesta, and I guess we'll pick that game a little bit later. But I want to make sure everybody knows who they're playing. Arizona State gets the winner of Texas and Clemson. As for Indiana, Notre Dame, I think that's a bit of a toss-up. I want to look at the weather report. Indiana can throw the ball around a little bit, and that might be enough. They've got a decent enough line. I don't think Notre Dame will dominate them like they did USC. USC a little bit light in the box. Ultimately, I think the Irish do prevail. Things have a way of happening in South Bend. I think that's the matchup. Everybody kind of wants to see a Georgia Notre Dame Sugar Bowl. I think you'll see that. But I wouldn't be shocked to see Indiana make quite a game out of that. I think Cignetti's done a really good job up there, and I think their ability to throw the ball could be a factor if weather allows.
Yeah, I'm excited to see. How about that one go to 8 overtimes, right? Like Georgia did that. Well, let those teams tire themselves out before they face Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Really good stuff there. Yeah, we'll have a lot to talk about next Monday night as we will, A, hear from Kirby Smart next Monday. That's what we're expecting. And then, B, we'll know who Georgia's going to play in the Sugar Bowl. So it'll be a whole lot different there. We're going to take another break here on The Beat. When we come back, our Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing Who's Hot and Who's Cold segment.
I'm so glad you're here.
Let's take a look.
Anytime can handle all your HVAC and plumbing needs, providing top quality service for a reasonable price.
All fixed now.
Can we call you again?
Yes, anytime. Any day? Yes, anytime.
But for the heats?
Yes, anytime. For the toilet? Yes, Anytime. Anytime you have a problem, just call.
Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. Large enough to handle your HVAC needs, but small enough to care.
All right, welcome back to On the Beat. It is time for our Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing Who's Hot and Who's Cold segment. Mike, not a whole lot of on-the-field action to talk about this week, so who's hot?
Well, you start with Travis Hunter. I mean, just, from Collins Silver Hill Silver Eagles on to New York City and the Heisman Trophy and the Golden Buffaloes. I looked it up. This guy truly is worth his weight in gold, by the way. In terms of millions of dollars, I mean, I think he had over $5 million in NIL deals, over 25 NIL deals cut while he was there. And now he looks like one of the top 3 picks in the NFL draft, depending on who has the pick win. That's going to add about another $40 million to his value based on the rookie contracts projected by Sport Track. But good to see a Georgia high school kid win that award. He joins a pretty exclusive fraternity of guys that's been able to do it from the state of Georgia. Of course, most notably, arguably the greatest college football player at all time, recent Georgia graduate, Herschel Walker, who is also hot for getting his degree from the University of Georgia. This is something that Herschel always wanted to do. This is, to me, a proud moment for Georgia football and Herschel Walker. And, my hope is that, people will really celebrate Herschel and what he's doing, what he did and what he's done now. Certainly, it almost seems poetic if Georgia meets Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl. Of course, Herschel pretty much carried Georgia to the 1980 championship that freshman season, even with an injured shoulder, as I mentioned earlier in the program. Also hot the portal, right, Cody? I mean, 1,550 guys, I think something like that, maybe up to 1,600. A lot of kids are in that portal right now. As you said, not a lot of earthquaking news as far as Georgia goes to this extent. But looking down at this list that ESPN recently put out, 26 kids from Arizona, and how about this? 24 from Arkansas, 24 from Mississippi State, 20 from Kentucky, 19 from Oklahoma, 19 from A&M. This is almost like 2 whole new signing classes. This is 2 years worth of turnover in 1 year. By the time it's all said and done from Georgia, probably see between 13, 15 dogs in that portal before it's all said and done as well. So a lot of turnover at these programs. You're going to see a lot in terms of, Texas A&M, you got to think Mike Elko, rebuilding that program, right? This is a chance for a facelift for a lot of these programs. So I'm going to say Travis Hunter, Herschel Walker, transfer portal, those things real hot for me.
All right, my hot this week has got to go to Mike White and the Georgia basketball team. 9-1 start this year. You got the freshman Asa Newell has won SEC Freshman of the Week 2 times out of the 5 times they've given out the award so far this year. Big win over Grand Canyon, so keep it up. Hoop Dog, we always talk about him this time of year. We need to be talking about him on the other side of New Year's when they get into conference play. If we can keep that going this year, how much fun would that be?
No doubt. I got to tell you, I actually ran into Asa Newell in a Costco, and he wasn't real hard to pick out, as you might imagine. Not a lot of 6'11" guys walking around, but the coolest thing about it was the handshake, the humbleness, how polite and how courteous he was, the way he represented his family, the way he represented the University of Georgia. If you haven't gotten to see Asa play, catch him. He's a one-and-done guy. He's going to go probably midway through the first round of the NBA draft. Just a really nice, humble kid that's really getting it done for the Bulldogs and Mike White right now.
That is great to hear. I love hearing stories about that when those guys, away from everything, are still really good guys. All right, let's do Who's Cold this week, Mike.
Oh, man, there's a lot of coldness going on. I mean, I feel bad for Arizona right now in that first-year coach losing 26 guys. There was a lot of hope for the Wildcats. Obviously, things didn't work out. Sam Pittman losing 24. Is that good news, bad news, Cody? I mean, some of these guys you don't want back. You got Bobby Petrino back. He's trying to really rev up that offense, but that's tough when you lose that many kids this early in the portal. That cools you off. And I got to say, Mark Stoops in Kentucky. Do they know something we don't know? I mean, I almost feel like Kentucky's tired of Mark Stoops, and Mark Stoops got to be tired of Kentucky. He was ready to go to A&M last year. So we're going to start with Kentucky football. I guess of those 4 schools I just mentioned, ice cold Kentucky football. A lot of guys in the portal. Doesn't look like a lot of hope for the Wildcats moving forward. All
right. For me, if I was going to do my hot as the Georgia men's basketball team, I will do my cold as the Georgia women's basketball team. Coach Abe off to a 5-6 or 6-5 start. Did squeak by UNC Greensboro today, but that's not the kind of team you need to be squeaking by. The Georgia women's team had their first losing season in over 40 years last year. Have not started off this season really strong. Now the good news is had a great recruiting class last year, just hadn't translated on the floor. It's one of those programs that not a lot of us follow super closely, but it's something when Andy Landers was there, you could always be proud of. They're in the top 25. They're doing big things. It's just not one of those programs right now, so hope to see that turned around. You can't have a team like you're losing to Georgia State and losing to Georgia Tech, and you got the Yellow Jackets up there in the top 25. We need the Lady Dogs back in the top 25. So let's get the Lady Dogs hot again.
Yeah, I got a lot of faith in Coach Abe. You know, she's tough. I think she does things the right way. Like you said, a lot of young players and a lot of good competition in women's basketball.
Yeah, it's a whole different league than it has been for a lot of those years where Andy Landers. All right, so we got playoffs starting this weekend. What's your ideal playoff viewing scenario, Mike?
Well, you know we're going to be tuned in on Friday night to Notre Dame and Indiana. We're going to see who the Dogs are playing next. You know, Kirby's going to be – he's already got guys watching all this tape. It's kind of funny when he says, oh, we haven't really looked at that. Well, maybe you haven't, Kirby, but you got some guys that are doing some cut-ups. You know, the other thing is I kind of wonder if maybe we get an official announcement on Carson back. I mean, Carson's not going to play again for Georgia this year. I've got, some reason to believe that. Now, when Kirby said there was no timetable – that was Kirby's way of telling you that. Because, Cody, it's not like Kirby Smart is sitting in his office saying, hey, if Carson calls in and lets us know, can somebody let me know so we can go ahead and start game plan? No. Kirby is already moving forward. Right. Kirby Smart does not wait and say, so no timetable to me told me everything I needed to know about the next game. And then you wonder a little bit about Carson's future. Does he come back for another year at Georgia? I don't think so. I think he probably goes pro more than likely. A lot of this is going to have to do with when can he work out for NFL teams and what are his agents telling him? You know, he's one of the hardest guys to project in the draft because we know he has an NFL arm. We know he has first-round upside. We know there were some setbacks this year. He battled back from them, but now he's got this UCL, this inner elbow ligament condition. So really hard to know that without knowing the situation and the severity of that. I know there's been some varying reports. I still think Carson's going to be ready to try the NFL waters. All it takes is one team to like you. I think he's a guy that could probably go no later than late second round. Some people said fourth round. I think his talent is greater than that. I think it's very unlikely that he goes anywhere else to play. I would say that would probably, though, be the second most likely scenario because I don't think he would come back to Georgia. I think Georgia has to move forward regardless of the Carson Beck situation. So that's kind of my order for Carson. I think more than likely he goes pro. I'd say there's a better 50% chance of that. I think there's a less likely chance he transfers somewhere else for maybe one season and then maybe coming back to Georgia. But more than anything, I'm gonna predict Carson going to the NFL and being picked in the first 2 rounds.
Really interesting stuff there. And yeah, there's plenty of tape out there of him throwing to NFL wide receivers and tight ends. Yeah. That tape looks a whole lot better than it did this year.
He did just fine for Brock Bowers. And Ladd McConkey. Just remember those games last year when he had some NFL talent.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, we'll have a lot more to talk about. Like we said, next week we'll know our opponent. We'll hear from Kirby Smart again. Going to be a busy week as we lead up to the playoffs right here on The Beat.